The most fundamental way is the attempt to use our government for a private agenda rather than the public good. And that represents itself in his willingness to use government power to go after personal enemies, in firing the prosecutors of the Department of Justice, and actually attempting to use the criminal investigative and prosecutorial authority to go after enemies. It's in the nature of the people that he's choosing as his political appointments, that, the leaders of our agencies, where loyalty to him is the primary requirement as opposed to competence and character. And as we're seeing in brutal fashion right now, the upending of the apolitical merit-based civil service system. And those are the people who are, at Department of Justice and at the FBI and at USAID and at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I mean, you have 2 million plus federal employees, a third of them who are veterans, because there's keen purpose of service that is what's driving them. 80% of them outside the DC area, and they are being treated in the worst possible way. So the federal workforce itself is, intended to be the engine room, and it's really the force of our executive function, the people who need to enforce the laws, the people who need to make sure our food is safe, the people who make sure we don't have plane crashes. I mean, the list is long, and it affects a large amount of the different things that we do in a very complicated world. So the President of the United States oversees the 2+ million people in the executive branch. There are also civil servants that work in the legislative branch and the judicial branch. But what's interesting is there's an oath of office that all civil servants and even political appointees swear, and it's not to the President of the United States. It's to the rule of law and to the Constitution. And our system was designed not to have a king. I mean, that was actually the biggest worry that the framers had. They didn't want to duplicate what they had run away from. And so they designed a system where there was a separation of powers, and there was a understanding that the rule of law and the Constitution was preeminent, not the will of the president. So civil servants for a long time have understood that their job is to follow the policy directives of the president, but to speak up if the law is being violated. And we did have a system 140 years ago called the spoils system, in which presidents did choose civil servants on the basis of their loyalty to them personally. And it was a nightmare. We had corruption and incompetence. We ultimately had a president, Garfield, assassinated because there was a disgruntled job seeker who was not happy with the outcome here. And that was a wake-up call for Congress and for the public. And we moved to the system we have today. But that is 140 years of precedent that is being thrown out the window. You don't realize maybe what all laws you need until somebody decides to walk all over either common sense or decency norms. But there are, in fact, a number of laws that exist. And as I noted, a lot of them were initiated by that assassination of President Garfield. So there are laws that make our system merit-based and apolitical, and federal employees have rights that have come up over the years to ensure that they aren't fired for political reasons and are fired for cause. It's very different than the private sector because you have this concern of politicization that you don't in the private sector. Unfortunately, we're watching a lot of activity that is ignoring those laws. And this is, I think, a real challenge to our system. We have a system that depends upon the president making choices that are constrained, that are self-constrained, and not requiring the courts or Congress to intervene. But when the courts and Congress do need to intervene, the president needs to respect those choices as well. And that's the system we have. It is under enormous stress and unnecessarily. Again, what's interesting here, or not interesting is a bad word, what's important here is we do need to reform our government, but what we're watching is not reform, we're watching the immolation of our government. Nothing like this. So there certainly have been presidents that have pushed the envelope on their power, but there haven't been any presidents that have ignored the envelope, which is really what we're watching right now. And with respect to the civil service, there have been certainly efforts to use civil servants for personal agenda. You look at the Nixon administration as probably the preeminent modern example of this. And there are a whole bunch of laws that came out of what happened after Nixon that were intended to protect against the overreach of presidents and to protect the public. And the one key example of that was the creation of the inspector generals, who are watchdogs to make sure that in fact we aren't having waste, fraud, and abuse. And this president has fired a large chunk of those inspector generals for no reason. They're supposed to be apolitical actors. By firing them, he's done the same thing that he's done with the prosecutors, which is he's removed people that might ultimately call out when he violates the law, and he's creating a culture in which everyone is going to be fearful of doing the right thing. No, no, there's not. And I think this is the most fundamental issue at play here. It comes back to this, intensely important issue, which is the president of the United States a king, or is the president of the United States actually a steward of the public's good? And FBI agents, Department of Justice, prosecutors, they wield unbelievable power, and they are highly trained, not just in terms of their skills, but also, frankly, in terms of their responsibility and ethics to look out for the public good. And they are supposed to prosecute without fear or favor. That system has been upended by the pressure on prosecutors and on the FBI and on the firings. And what we are leading towards is the use then of that intensely powerful authority, against Americans, to pursue again private aims. And it is deeply troubling to see this happen. And you can't pretend that there aren't instances in which prosecutors are doing things they shouldn't do. But what we're talking about here is the systematic effort to convert that power to the will of a single individual, and as opposed to the rule of law and the public's interest. And that is, if you had to highlight the things we should be most worried about, it's one of the top of the list. What is so astonishing here is that the way this is being done, whatever one might think about the apparent goal of shrinking the federal workforce, which I hope we can come back to, the way it's being done is incontrovertibly stupid. If you're trying to make for a better workforce, then to effectively randomly push people out, not looking at the nature of the occupation or the quality of the performance, I mean, that cannot make sense. It's certainly not in the taxpayer's interest. So we've never seen anything like this before. We've certainly seen efforts to make our government more efficient. I believe effectiveness is actually even more important than efficiency, but that's again another potential avenue to go down. But this is unique in the way this is being done. And if you look at the stories that are being told to the federal workforce, it has changed over time. So this administration has started with a very intensive effort to create chaos and fear. Then they opened the aperture for people to leave, and essentially having the chaos and fear push them out. But they've so lost trust that fundamentally, I think, as a percentage, very few federal employees, despite the difficulties of being in this administration, are going to take that offer. Presidents are executing the law. They depend upon Congress to provide. Congress has the power of the purse, but the resources. We have a continuing resolution. We do not have a full year of funding for our government, which is again another broken aspect of our government. But the administration, it would seem, would be moving beyond its power to be offering resources to federal employees post the end of that continuing resolution, which is mid-March.